We are getting started on today's event, Food Security in North Carolina. What's going on and what can we do about it? And before we go on to talk about the reasons that we're all here today, I just want to let you know that if you're an attendee, you are muted and your video is off. But in 1 minute, I'll show you how to submit questions or comments at any point during this event. And I also want to mention that if you have any technological issues, we have Paul Bonici, our tech guru, standing by, so you can write in that chat box at the bottom of your page and he can help you to resolve that issue. So my name is Joanna Sierks-Smith, and I just came on board as the Associate Director for State Outreach and Community College Collaborations at Carolina Public Humanities. And for those of you who are familiar with our programming, you'll know that normally we would be putting on a full season of public events right now. But of course, everything has changed. So instead, we are working to set up a series of virtual events that use the humanities as a tool for grappling with COVID-19. And few conversations feel as urgent right now as those around food security. Unsurprisingly, this crisis has magnified certain vulnerabilities and has made the inequities in our food access glaringly apparent. But there are also ways that this historic crisis seems to be unifying people under suddenly broadened concerns around food scarcity. And we're seeing businesses and nonprofits and communities stepping up with wildly resourceful ways of trying to ensure that everyone in North Carolina has food during this lockdown. So at the risk of being too optimistic during an uncertain time, it does seem that the crisis has the potential to be a watershed moment, because it is forcing us on both individual and communal levels to articulate our connections to one another and to reckon with our responsibilities to one another. Now, of course, in just an hour and 15 minutes, what our speakers are going to be able to share with us will be in no way a comprehensive portrait of food access in North Carolina, but it will give us a chance to gain some insight into the histories of food disparities in the state, as well as a chance to reflect on some of the cultural narratives that fuel our understanding of why hunger persists and that shape our expectations about what kind of change is possible. And of course, it will also give us a chance to share valuable resources. So today's event will follow a fairly straightforward format, assuming that all of our technology runs smoothly. I will first introduce Dr. Maureen Berner, who will give us some historical context to disparities in food access around the state and to ongoing efforts to combat hunger. And then I'll step back in to reintroduce Megan Tice, who will be drawing on her experiences as a hunger relief program associate at Table to discuss the specific ways in which COVID-19 has impacted food access in North Carolina. And after Megan presents, we'll shift and spend the rest of our time doing an audience Q&A in which I can read your questions out loud for our speakers to discuss. Now, throughout today's presentations, you're able to submit questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you are like me and you have a fear of interrupting, I want to assure you that these questions won't be visible to the entire crowd, and they will also not be distracting to the panelists themselves. They will just be set aside in a sidebar for us to open up at the end. So please do feel free to submit questions as they occur to you. Now, I also know that we have folks in the audience tonight who are themselves at the forefront of efforts to combat hunger, and I invite you to share your perspectives with us during the Q&A. I also want you all to know that we'll be posting a video of today's event online, and we'll include a slide there at the end of that video with a few key resources that you can use to find out the best local resources near you, the best ways to access food in your neighborhood, and the best ways to get involved. So without further ado, let me welcome our first speaker, Dr. Maureen Berner, and then Megan and I can mute our audio and video and turn it over to you. So Dr. Berner is a professor of public administration and government who earned her doctorate in public policy from the LBJ School of Public Affairs at UT Austin. And she's been at UNC's School of Government since 1998, where her research focuses on the ability of local organizations to address food insecurity, poverty, and income inequality. And while she's been in North Carolina, she's worked extensively with nonprofits, food banks, local governments, and state agencies on the issue of food security. So Maureen, thank you so much for being here, and you can take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I am going to try to share my screen, and I just want to confirm I'll that you all can see that. I just want to make sure that we, and let me know, Joanna, if it's not showing up as appropriate. What I want to do is to set the stage with food insecurity and what has sort of led us up to this point, and then what we're starting to hear about food issues right now in the midst of this crisis. So let me start off just by making sure that we get a couple terms down that are really important. What I'm thinking of in particular is try to make sure that people understand the difference between poverty and food insecurity. When we talk about poverty rates in any particular state or place, that's a real formal federal definition that is actually pretty strict. It really identifies almost the poorest of the poor. Food insecurity is a little bit of a different concept in the sense that it encompasses folks who are considered to be living in poverty, but it also captures folks who you might think about as the working poor, or as folks who they may not be living in poverty, but they're pretty close, or they're on the edge. And so food insecurity is really looking at the issue of, can you have a healthy diet on a regular basis, day in, day out, week in, week out, and that you're not worried about your ability to put meals on the table at the end of the day. So it really does go with the idea of being insecure. You don't have a stable food secure situation in your household. And that's a little bit broader than when we talk about folks who are living in poverty. I really like the idea of food insecurity as a measure of what's going on at the street level, at the household level, because you're really saying, can people make ends meet? Because if you can't put dinner on the table on a regular basis and know that you can do that day to day, then you really aren't able to meet all your basic needs in the house. This is where you're talking about, I'll skip a meal because the electric bill is due, or I'll split up the meals. We'll split up the meals with the kids because we have to get gas in the car in order to get to the job. Or we're going to go visit the food pantry to stretch things out at the end of the month. So that's what food insecurity really captures. But I really think that if you're in any of those situations, you really are on the edge. And so I like that as a much better indication of need in our communities. Official poverty rates have all sorts of issues because they measure income coming into a household, but they're not talking about whether anything is affordable or accessible, or what all the demands are. So food insecurity, I think, to me, is the best measure of where we are economically as a state. So thinking about food insecurity as the best measure of where we are, we're not doing too well in North Carolina, but you can definitely see that it is concentrated down east. It's definitely food insecurity exists throughout the state. But it's really not surprising that there are certain areas that are doing much worse than others. And so when you see the really dark colored counties, that's a place where at least 1 in 4 people are in a food insecure household. That's 1 in 4. And it can go up even higher than that. It can go up to about 27% food insecurity. When we talk about children specifically, because children tend to be concentrated in lower income households anyway. You have counties where you have food insecurity with children getting closer to 1 in 3 overall. And you have some school districts that deal with food insecurity levels that are much higher. And we can talk about that in a moment. Let me move on and sort of talk about how we deal with food insecurity, because I think that I'm going to give you some data related to the Food Assistance Network that shows historically how need has changed over time. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about how we deal with food insecurity, right? So we deal with food insecurity first and foremost through government assistance programs, such as supplemental nutrition for people, SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And currently in North Carolina, that's covering about 12% of the state population. But the Food Assistance Network fills in the gaps where government programs don't work. In addition to SNAP, we also have the free and reduced price lunch program in schools, and we'll also talk about that. But first, let's talk about, here's the SNAP numbers. This is pre-COVID. 1.3 million North Carolina residents were receiving food stamps, what was formerly known as food stamps. That's 12% of the state population, or about 1 in 8. Okay? But we have all these additional ways in which we're providing food assistance. These are kids at school getting backpacks at the end of the week. Now, we do cover kids in school with free and reduced price lunch. And that can range all the way up to some counties having in the 90 percentile levels of their students getting free and reduced price lunch. Overall, in North Carolina schools, we have approximately 900,000 students participating in the free and reduced price lunch program. We are a majority free and reduced price lunch school population. That is, we have more kids eligible for that program than kids who are not. We are a majority child poverty state when you think about the children in the K through 12 school system. And I once talked to a legislator about that, and they said, that just can't be right, because that means 1 in 2 kids. That means every other kid is in this situation. And I was like, no, that's right. That's the reality in North Carolina. And so this is not an uncommon scene where, in addition to being in the free and reduced price lunch, you have kids seeking additional resources that they can use at their homes on the weekends and over the summer. So this is a picture of a weekend backpack program, right? In addition, the nonprofit sector is also serving adults, families overall, and so this is also part of that system. These are folks lined up waiting to get entry to one of the larger food pantries in Raleigh, and they're waiting in line before the doors open so that they can get moving on the 2 to 3 hour process to get groceries from the food pantry. So just really briefly, to talk about how we're going to meet this crisis, I want to give people just the real quick and dirty about how this system works in general. And this is a very general sort of schematic. It differs in all different parts of the state. we have farms, individual donors, businesses donating to the food bank, and not just one food bank, there's multiple food banks across the state. Those food banks serve as a distribution center in general to give what they bring in and what they purchase in bulk to individual food pantries and nonprofits that get the food out to the clients. And then those individual nonprofits, those food pantries or other agencies, they also get direct donations from donors, food, dollars, all sorts of partners that they're individually dealing with. So again, sort of the example of this is at an individual food pantry. This is a picture from Dunn, and by the way, we do have permission with all of our photographs. This is from a number of years ago with a special photography project across the state. But this would be typical that you see folks in line at a food pantry. They represent all different ages, all different communities, different ages, different folks coming from different parts of our community. And again, they're lined up waiting for the doors to open. This is another example of how this nonprofit food system works, which is, this is a church that has a particular day in which folks come, and on one side you see the folks from the church filling up a basket as people move along and get what they're going to take with them, take that home. So that food assistance network is supported by the federal program food stamps. It's supported by school lunch programs, and it's supported by women's, infant, and children program, as well as about another 10 other federal programs dealing with emergency suppers or congregate meals for seniors, and a lot of other smaller, very targeted programs. But what I wanted to do was to let folks know that this is a very general, and it's probably an out-of-date figure at this point, of the nonprofit contribution to food assistance is the blue bar, and then the orange bar is the federal food assistance amount of money that's going in to support folks nationally. So we often talk about we're going to rely on the nonprofit sector to sort of fill the gap, but I just want to let folks know that compared to the federal dollars, we're talking a difference of maybe $5 billion in the nonprofit world to about $90 billion each year through federal resources. So when we're talking about relying on one sector to the other, the behemoth still is federal resources, even though the nonprofits are really filling in the gaps. They're the social safety net of the last resort. To give you, again, some idea of who's providing what services, there are 6 to 7, depending on how you define it, nonprofit food bank regions in the state. The one I've worked with most closely has been the food bank of the Central and Eastern North Carolina. That's who's serving us locally. That's in the dark blue on this map. And this is another example of a food pantry. This is in northern Orange County, North Carolina, Orange Congregations in Mission. And they have a food pantry up there that's a smaller food pantry just in a little sort of office park outside of Hillsborough. To give you a sense of how big this network is, even though it's small in comparison of total dollars, it actually is a huge network. How many pantries, food pantries, are in this, are like the Samaritan Relief, Orange Congregations in Mission that we see here up outside of Hillsborough, when you look at the blue area on this map, across that 450 individual food pantries in that 34 counties served by that food bank. But that's not the only types of places that get food. When you talk about additional organizations like nursing homes, domestic violence shelters, homeless shelters, soup kitchens, senior meals, different agencies that deliver those, you're talking about 800 partner agencies just in that central North Carolina area. When you talk about across North Carolina as a whole, and again, these numbers fluctuate all the time, so these are just general numbers. You're talking over 2,000 individual partner agencies, closer to 2,500 across the state, just in North Carolina, and across the US, 46,000. So this is a huge, huge social safety net that's trying to react to this crisis. To give you a sense of how many people they serve, now this is clearly out of date now. In 2015-16, food stamps served in North Carolina about 1.6 million folks. The nonprofits served 3.7 million folks. So even though they have less money, they're serving more people. So they are really stretched in terms of what they're doing. Now here's a little bit of a historical context of how this has grown. In 1995, when the Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina really was at a minimal level, they got going in the early 90s, but they're starting, if I use 95 as a starting point, they gave out 5 million pounds of food in 1995. In 2014, they gave out 55 million pounds of food, a 10-fold increase. Go forward a couple years, and they are up into the 50s and 60s million pounds. And I'm even gonna have to, yeah, there were 65 million pounds. And I was just updating this recently that, oops, why can't I go further? Oh, it was just, for some reason it was holding there. They are now talking in response to recent hurricanes. They were at over 80 million pounds of food, and I didn't have any room on my slide to put the line up further. The lesson I want to pass on to you here is that the stress on the nonprofit sector to try to meet the food needs of folks has been growing exponentially since 1995. There's not been a fall off for the nonprofits. It has only been growing. So even if we see sort of a stabilization, if you hear with poverty rates or even with food insecurity, that's not the whole picture. All you need to do is look at what's going on with the nonprofits, and it has been growing. It's been a record year every single year. To give you a specific example of a food pantry in Pittsboro, they went from 400 families in 1999. They hit 5,000 families in 2014. And I just got in touch with Cora today, and this is what they have posted on their website. They have seen in the wake of COVID, a doubling of the number of families that they are trying to serve, from 160 to 200 family members. Now they're going up to 350 every day. and this is what was on their website, is that regularly, they're not just up to serving, 5,000 families. They were serving 20,000 individuals just in the Chatham County area before COVID hit. Now they're going to face on track to double those numbers. And so this is their statement. They've had food orders been canceled, and now they are specifically asking for donations of food because they can't meet the need. And so they're looking for food donations or funding where they can buy in bulk and be creative and innovative with how they're purchasing food. So the next message I want to get, and I'll try to get moving more quickly because I know we need to talk about what's actually happening on the ground. I'm really worried about the issues about capacity, product, and coverage. So the implications are these two pictures. I love these pictures, are from the Catholic Parish Outreach in Raleigh. This is the backbone. This is not a recipient. This is a volunteer. The volunteers for this sector, especially with the food bank, is that they rely on older volunteers, and those are the folks who are most who can't show up anymore. So, or who have become the folks who are needed. So we're talking about food shortages. I'm going to even sort of skip this, and I can talk about that later in terms of specific needs of kids. But in terms of capacity issues, I'm going to flip through this really quickly, is that my research really says there's not the capacity immediately to meet this need as much as folks are trying to scramble. And I think that that's going to raise some really long-term issues. I just want to remind folks, this was a headline from the recession in 2009. Everyone is talking about the potential for a recession that will be worse coming out of the COVID crisis. So we really are looking at some major issues in terms of short-term, medium-term, long-term stability in feeding our folks going forward. And with that, I want to stop sharing and turn it back over to you all.
Thank you so much. That was hugely informative. And I can see that we've already got questions coming in about your presentation. One quick one that I want to ask out loud. The chart that you showed about the difference in funding that's coming from a government versus private sector, is that comparison for North Carolina, or is that applicable for the entire country?
That was national.
Okay.
That was national. But the trends are basically the same. The main takeaway from that is to simply understand, to me, the ability of the nonprofit sector to step in and cover all the need. We have to be realistic about that. There are huge resources at the federal level that are already being brought to bear. Mm-hmm. So I don't want folks to get the sense that the nonprofit sector is sort of equal to its role in dealing with hunger across the US. They are the folks that are helping the folks who are already getting benefits and more. That's why I call them the social safety net of last resort. If you can't get benefits, but you're still hungry, the nonprofits are trying to capture you, or trying to catch you before you fall. And it helps when the food stamps aren't enough, or if they run out at the end of the month. So they are really our protector of last resort, and they are holding just an incredible task.
Well, that seems like a perfect segue into Megan's presentation. So let me give a short introduction to Megan, and then she can take it from here. So Megan Tice received her BA in Public Policy from UNC Chapel Hill with a concentration in poverty reduction and a minor in Southern Literature. And she returned to UNC as a graduate student, where she's now wrapping up an MA in folklore, looking at narratives of the American South. And she also has the distinction of being one of this year's Adams Fellows, which, for those of you who are not familiar, is a fellowship run through Carolina Public Humanities that supports graduate students who are doing publicly engaged work. And in 2019, Megan joined the Table team as a hunger relief program associate. So Megan, we're so grateful to have you here with us during what we know is an extraordinarily busy time.
Thanks, appreciate it. And I would just like to say that I reiterate and appreciate so much the background that Dr. Berner pointed out. I think all of those things are often overlooked when we think about hunger, big picture, small picture. So I just really appreciated that background. So a few things I'd like to talk about is, to start off, I'd like to say that prior to where we are now with the COVID-19 epidemic, many of the things that we are doing as nonprofits were considered impossible. It was impossible to deliver door-to-door for 600 kids. It was impossible to give children free and reduced school lunches outside of school, those kind of things. And there has been a lot of on-the-ground adaptations, a lot of on-the-ground thinking, quick on your feet, and it is a hard transition to be able to do those things. So pre-COVID-19, just to give you a little bit of background, so I'll talk specifically about Table, and then I can widen that a little bit, but Table is a nonprofit in Chapel Hill, Carborough, and Orange County City Schools. We provide the weekend meal backpack programs. You saw a picture of what that looks like at some sites, not all, to children, to provide what would be the food that they would get for free and reduced school lunches during the week. So we provide enough food, both fresh food and non-perishables, to cover Saturday and Sunday to make sure they return to school Monday full and ready to learn. Pre-COVID-19, those bags would go directly to their schools. The social workers would distribute them. And then that was kind of it for us. We operated with about 400 volunteers. The process was Monday, we would do food sorting. Tuesday and Wednesday, we'd do bagging. Thursday, fresh food. Thursday, delivery. And it was like that every week. It was a very smooth, kind of well-oiled machine process. Post-COVID-19, that obviously looks very different. A big reason for that, which is something Dr. Berner mentioned, is a large portion of our volunteer base disappeared. They were 60 plus individuals who were retired or who were maybe even still working but ready or had the capacity to donate their time, or they were college kids who were in the Chapel Hill area because they were students at UNC, sometimes from Duke, it's a little further for what we do, but that were coming to volunteer on nights after classes. And since this epidemic has happened, or this pandemic has happened, we have completely seen a shift in our volunteer base. And that has been a really interesting problem to try to overcome. So a few things that have shifted since the pandemic started is we are now delivering door-to-door to over 600 kids at Table, but we are only doing it with a volunteer base of about 30 people. So that means that staff and volunteers are at Table Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday to do bagging. A few volunteers show up Thursday afternoon to take the sites, to direct the bags directly to the children's homes, and then we do that again day after day. Within that, there are other things that come up for not just us, but other organizations. So Table traditionally does partner with groups like Porch, IFC, St. Joseph's, Heavenly Groceries, and the free and reduced school lunch program, so the nutrition programs at the schools. That has had to completely shift for all of us. So Table is no longer able to go to school, so we've had to shift operations. Porch is no longer able to give big bags of food, so they're giving out gift cards to grocery stores to try to supplement incomes. IFC is taking appointments to come shop at the food pantry. Free and reduced school lunches are going directly to neighborhoods for children to come pick them up. And the list goes on and on for the adaptations that have had to be made. But we're all operating with some major disruptions in our cycles. One, Dr. Berner mentioned the disruption in the food cycle. Long-standing orders with organizations that sell in bulk to these places, including the Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina, are no longer able to fulfill those orders. Food that they had on hold or that they had already ordered in warehouses from their distributors is just gone. It's been bought up by other organizations. It's been sent to other states that are at higher risk during this pandemic. Sometimes they don't know why it's not there. And that is just a reality that we're faced with daily, is being able to buy. Organizations that do have items in bulk have limits on how much you can buy in a lot of cases, even if you are a 501c3. So there are certain places that we usually shop at, and we could potentially get a pallet of tuna, but we can now only buy 5 cans of tuna in a day. So if you're serving 600 kids, there's no possible way for us to get enough tuna or another type of like peanut butter, another type of strong protein to give to our children. So that is definitely a huge disruption that has come. The volunteer disruption that I mentioned as far as ages, but also the people who come into our space, being mindful that food insecurity is part of a much, much bigger cyclical pattern. It's a part of many of our families are uninsured families. So if they were to get COVID-19 from one of our volunteers, it would be just absolutely disastrous for them. I mean, anybody, but definitely for them and their family to be able to get access to food or access to care. Many of our families are still working because they're in what are the essential services. They're in the grocery store industry, the convenience stores, the gas stations, the farms, things like that. So their ability to actually physically get out to locations to get food has completely changed. And also just general problems with our ability to respond rapidly enough to the growing need. As more and more people in North Carolina are laid off, our requests grow weekly, honestly daily, not even weekly, for food assistance for families. And our ability to be able to continue to serve them and serve them well depends on these things like the volunteer cycle and food cycle being able to be either worked out or very creative problem solving on the ground to be able to solve those things. Table does partner very strongly with farmers. I think farmers are a positive note on this. Farmers are truly being a saving grace during this time. Farmers are often, I think, undervalued in today's world for how much that they do, but the farmers markets are still operating. They're still able to get food out. But again, when you're talking about people who are food insecure, that's the question of transportation and time to get there and get it. But for us, we have had farmers, Farmer Food Share, which is an organization that connects North Carolina farmers to businesses and nonprofits where they can get rid of their food. They've been amazing partners in this time. We have a farm that we partner with exclusively called Wildflower Lane, where he approached us a couple of years ago and said, you know, I'm an organic farmer. I have the land to do this. Table, as part of our program, offered him seed money, not business seed money, but literal like seeds in the ground money. And we provide volunteers and he gives us food. So that partnership has been just absolutely a lifesaver in this time. And then organizations like Layton's Produce, which is based out of Raleigh, who are a larger distributor, have been just amazing to be able to get food across state lines into North Carolina to continue to feed the need. Dr. Berner mentioned that when she told a legislator that a majority of children were on free and reduced school lunches, he was shocked. I think pre-COVID-19, that was true. Post-COVID-19, that's even more true, even in our area. Chapel Hill, Carborough, and Orange County are generally thought of as very affluent places. We are very blessed to live in an area that has a national or internationally ranked hospital, to have a wonderful university at our back door, and all the people that those two places employ. But there's still 1 in 3 kids that get free and reduced school lunches from Chapel Hill, Carborough, or Orange County city schools. And that's a lot. That's a really high number of children that rely on those things. And as I mentioned earlier, those are children whose parents are working in jobs that they are still working. So the responses that are occurring have to take into account, which is what we've been trying to do, and a lot of other organizations are as well, the limited capacity of these kids to get to mass feeding operation sites. Another problem that we run into quite a bit, and that is a challenge even during normal circumstances, is that many of the children who qualify for free and reduced school lunch are children of undocumented parents, even though they themselves may be documented. The refugees who are having a harder time navigating the system, or come from places where they are distrustful of the government and their ability to provide for them, or they are working class families who, like as I mentioned earlier, they just don't have the capacity right now to be able to come out. And as our responses change, we see those same problems magnified even more in our current responses. The chance of a undocumented child or refugee child coming to a site of mass operations, or even coming to table directly to pick up food, is a challenge, and something that we talk about constantly with the county and with other organizations about how do we make sure that every child is being reached. And I'm talking explicitly about children. There are things in place for older adults. However, my job at table, I unfortunately do not work very closely with those, but I know that even organizations like Meals on Wheels are having to rapidly adapt their responses to take into account things like they are delivering to a very vulnerable population. How do they ensure that their volunteers are not causing a spread of that? How is their food being prepared? How is their food being stored? Those kind of questions are impacting across the board, not just places that are serving children explicitly. As Dr. Berner mentioned, she said the stress has been growing exponentially since 1995. And I feel like we've had from 1995 to 2019 in 3 weeks, just within the food responses that we've been doing. So I think being really aware that nonprofits are trying to step in, but as the pandemic grows and as we on the ground problem solve, the problem solutions that we came up with Monday might not be applicable next Monday. As more information comes out about the virus, as more information comes out about unemployment, as more information comes out about funding or food supply. So those things are just this constantly changing aspects of the work that we do and the work that we're trying to do and will continue to try to do throughout this pandemic. Dr. Berner said that capacity, product, and coverage are her main concerns. And I think that from the conversations that I've had with other people working at nonprofits, the conversations we have among our staff, the conversations I've had with people in emergency response services, those are kind of the big things that everyone is worrying about and thinking about right now. A lot of people ask, well, could we, if more people are losing their jobs, therefore they're filing for unemployment, could they be covered by federal programs that, like the ones that Dr. Berner mentioned? One of the problems that we're seeing is that food stamps come out, I think, once a month. And when those families go to use their food stamps, they only have a certain type of food that they can buy, certain brands, certain items, things like that. And when they get there, those things are all gone because they only have a very limited amount of time to shop. So they may hold on to them for a few weeks, but that doesn't change the fact that for a week or 2 weeks, their food stamps were basically useless because there was no food that they qualified to purchase. So I hope I didn't paint an entirely negative picture for what's going on. I think a lot of people know that it is a bleak time, and it is a very challenging time across the board. I guess a nature of hope, a little piece of hope, and I would love to answer any questions that I could about what things are being done on the ground, or knowledge that we have had to pivot strongly with, is that these organizations, as I mentioned when I started, are doing the impossible. The things that we're doing at Table were things that 6 weeks ago, there was no possible way that we thought it could ever be done. If a volunteer shift 6 weeks ago wasn't filled to the capacity and we had 6 volunteers instead of 12 volunteers, there was a panic of how it would get done, and it's getting done. And people are really coming together. I will say that our community has just shocked us with their generosity and their compassion at this time. So I think that even in light of such dark times, there are some really beautiful things that we have seen from it. We've seen our town come together around us, around Porch, around IFC, and even around the emergency responders in such an amazing way, which is just absolutely amazing to witness and be a part of. We've seen human compassion at its finest, and we have seen creativity flow in ways that I don't think people even knew they had 3 weeks ago. So with that, I will wrap up, and I will turn it back over to Joanna for questions or anything that we can help answer.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Megan, both for the work that you're doing and for sharing that with us. Just one quick follow-up question. What has made the biggest difference, would you say, in making, as you say, what seemed impossible a month ago possible today? Is it about more volunteers? Is it about more donations coming in? What are the critical changes?
Well, there's a few things. So one, I would say we're operating with significantly fewer volunteers, but volunteers that have a different capacity. So a few weeks ago, a lot of people worked full-time jobs and could not take 2 hours out of their day on a Tuesday afternoon to deliver door-to-door to children. But now they have time, which is something that they certainly did not have a while ago. Table has been serving over 700 kids for a while, so like the 600 number isn't the jarring number, but I think what not surprised us, because we've always known that the Chapel Hill community was incredibly generous, but what was just so shocking or so surprising, wonderfully surprising, was how quickly people responded. I mean, we put out a call for paper bags because we're doing bigger bags of food for children who live further away that we can't get to every week. So we're trying to do bags that would last them 2 weeks instead of 1 week to be able to, limit our to accommodate what our volunteers are capable of doing. We put out a call for paper bags because we had 3 left. And when I left today, we were trying to figure out where we were going to put paper bags because there were just hundreds in the building. So I think that those kind of things have really helped the big picture questions for sure. So
oh, great. That's great. Well, before we get rolling on more granular questions, I do want to make sure that we answer in a very clear way. What are some key resources that are available to the general public if they are looking for a place to get food in this pandemic?
Well, let me jump in and say that one thing that has come out of this is a real focus on trying to make resources available. So, for example, if folks are in need of any assistance, the Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina is one place where if you just go to their first main webpage, it sort of says, if you need something, click here. And that serves as a gateway into a whole variety of resources. Same with No Kid Hungry North Carolina. They have a gateway into a lot of resources. In fact, in a way, some folks are trying to step back and say, we need to let the gatekeeper serve as a really good, as a funnel point. So those are at least 2 places that I would start if anybody needs it.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and I totally we have quite a few people who find us that say like, hey, I was on the Central Food Bank's website and you popped up. I think that's awesome. A lot of nonprofits in the area, Table's one of them, IFC, I believe, is on board. Even local hospitals are a part of a program called NC Cares. So if you go to one nonprofit or say you're having problems with your car isn't working, you go to one place to try to get help with that money, you can ask them if they're a member of the NC Cares network. And if they are, what they can do is type up the entire list of needs that you have. Like maybe your car isn't working, you're having housing problems, and you need food help. And they'll send that out to the NC Cares network on a referral network, and we'll be able to get in touch with you in that way as well.
That's fantastic. Yeah, one thing that is so clear from both of your presentations is that without those kind of funnel points or without those gatekeepers, it could be a full-time job trying to patch together enough food to feed your family from all these different sources. So I'd like to turn to the questions now. And let's start out with one from Tom Taylor. He asks, can you provide examples or otherwise describe predicaments in which a person or a family is hungry but does not qualify for SNAP or WIC benefits?
Actually, it's fairly, I was amazed when I first started doing research in this area that of the population that's considered food insecure, and this is established via federal research that is really methodologically strong and rigorous through surveys, random surveys nationally, that about a third of the folks who meet the criteria for food insecurity, that is, they might skip a meal, they're not sure if money will last till the end of the month, things like that. About a third of that population make too much to qualify for food stamps. So if you look at the totality of the food insecure population in the country, only about 2/3 of that group actually even qualify for the benefits. There's different qualifications, but in general, for the folks who work in this area, it's pretty well understood that you really have to be needy, really, in order to qualify for many of our benefits. And a lot of our benefit programs have not been, so there's still issues about folks who qualify, but who are not enrolled. That is, even though a program might be available, not everyone who is eligible is being served. And there's a lot of work in trying to figure out why aren't people signing up? What are the barriers to signing up? Is it language? Is it stigma? Is it that they can't get to the place where they need to sign up? So I like to think about it in terms of the concept of what you might think about the working poor, which is sort of like, I'm working, I'm making do, but I'm on the edge, right? I don't qualify for benefits, but I'm not quite making everything ends meet. And this also has to deal with the idea that a lot of these families on the edge, they don't have assets. I forget the percentage, but I think it's something like 40% of the American population would not be able to deal with a $400 bill immediately. So folks are one illness away from needing food. They're one car breakdown away from needing food. They're one daycare payment away from needing food. And so then when you talk about hundreds of thousands of folks being laid off, that's suddenly they have moved from the I can make it work, I'm making it work, to I can't make it work. I can't pay the mortgage or the rent and the energy bills and buy food anymore. So that's where we're at a crisis.
And I would, one thing that we see is, I believe since June of 2019, a family of three is around like $39,000-ish to qualify. While that may stretch a little further in certain counties, $39,000 for a family of three in Chapel Hill or Carborough is not going to take you very far. When you account for cost of living, rent, food, even in the area, when you look at the type of grocery stores that we have easily accessible for many people. So I think just really being mindful that even if you get the assistance, is not necessarily okay, you now have a federal assistance, you're good. It is piece, a very large piece and very helpful piece for sure of the puzzle. But again, $39,000 in Chapel Hill for 3 people isn't, if you have childcare and all those other things Dr. Berner mentioned.
Right. I mean, Megan, you used air quotes to talk about how things were normal before this. And I think a question that we should loop back to in closing in a couple minutes is what kind of systemic change is needed, not just to get us through COVID-19, but to perhaps address some of the issues that were already prevalent beforehand. Another question we have gotten here this is from Janice Harrington, is a 2-part question. And she asks, how does the level of food insecurity in North Carolina compare to levels in the neighboring states? And if North Carolina's level is higher, what are other states doing differently to address and reduce food insecurity?
Well, I can, one thing that is interesting is if folks want to find out about state-by-state data around food and nutrition services, I'll point you to the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, which has a state-by-state breakdown of food stamp usage. And I don't have neighboring states' percentages with food insecurity, but in general, North Carolina has higher levels of food insecurity than nationally, but there's huge variation. Texas, for instance, has much worse, higher levels of childhood food insecurity than we do. So I might talk about, it's 1 in 2 kids being food insecure in North Carolina or in our school system. And the folks from Texas would say, well, that's fine, but for us, it's 3 out of 4 or something like that. So there's wide variation. I also want to emphasize that there are pockets because some counties are doing much better than others. And that's what that map sort of illustrates, is that there are typical areas of our state that are higher need than others. Mountain counties, down east, it's more of an issue in rural areas in general than in urban. But in urban areas, you have pockets of very highly distressed areas within Charlotte, for example. Okay. So there's a lot of variation. What are they doing to address and reduce food insecurity? The same thing that we are doing here. There is an emphasis on increasing participation in existing programs. So, for example, the Women, Infants, and Children's Program, which provides assistance specifically for pregnant women, women with small children, because of the importance of good nutrition and food at a young age. That program provides food up to the age of 5. Well, a lot of folks drop out before their kids get up to the age 5. They'll do it when the babies are there, but then they pull out of the program, they don't participate. We haven't done enough research to know exactly why or how to get them to go. Same thing with free and reduced price lunch in schools. Highest participation rates are in elementary. Starts to drop off in middle school, drops way off in high school. Why? Well, it's part of it might be stigma, part of it might be capacity. So we're trying to address participation in established programs. But then we also have the issue of, are there other ways that we can try to get food to households that are new or innovative ways? So that's everything from community gardens to bringing cooking classes in the schools. I'm doing research on campus-based food insecurity. So there's issues about trying to build the capacity of the nonprofits, like Megan's. Like, if they're more efficient, if they're effective in getting food out, let's build them up. So I'll tell you, come up with a good idea and let's try it.
Now, related to that discussion of all of these creative possibilities that are out there, a question that we got before this event even took place was about how both of you in your work grapple with the tension between, on the one hand, the very urgent daily needs of your clients, and on the other hand, this longer view of perhaps systemic problems. So how do you, on a day-to-day basis, how do you decide to invest energy in this new innovative idea or in pushing for a legislative change versus just trying to get food to someone's door?
Megan, do you want to? I have some thoughts, but I want to hear what you think.
Yeah, sure. So I would say pre-pandemic that a lot more conversations were happening around the systematic changes. Because even before we entered a quote unquote crisis, which is a crisis, I'm not diminishing that at all, so many people were in crisis all the time. This is not something that has caught any organization by surprise, that the need is there. Maybe the rapid growth of it has, and definitely the restrictions put in place by the pandemic as far as volunteers and food supply has, but the actual need has not. As far as, like, we've always known that those things are there and are multiplying and are, as Dr. Berner pointed out, they're getting worse. They're not getting better every year. So before this, we had a ton of conversations, and we are hoping to revisit them once we're able to get our feet back under us. As I mentioned, everything changes so rapidly. What we did last week may not be applicable for what we know about health and spread and things next week. But a lot of the conversations we were having were around the questions of what can we do at a younger age to reduce stigma. So as Dr. Berner mentioned, so many children unenroll themselves from even programs like ours because they don't want their classmates to know that they are receiving food. So how do we maybe not normalize, because this certainly is not something that needs to be normalized. There needs to be a bigger change that stops this cycle from happening. But how do we create conversations where people feel equipped to have these conversations in their classrooms with their friends, those type of things? We've had questions around food nutrition. That's one thing that we talk about a lot at Table. We have a program that usually operates, that goes in the schools and teaches nutrition education to children, where they do lessons on like dairy and dairy supplements, and we give them all the information to be able to make those decisions for themselves. And then we try to provide them with resources on how can they actually afford to get those things, or like how, what kind of changes need to be placed for those kind of changes. We have conversations often around the higher level questions of like minimum wage, and can people survive on what they're making in their households? If not, where are the gaps that we can step in and help, whether that's working at a state level to talk to legislators, whether that's working within the schools to talk to educators about what the changes they see that need to be made, those kind of things for sure. And I think that those questions are magnified. They're just incredibly highlighted during this time, that if something doesn't change in the way that these questions of food insecurity and poverty and living wage and those kind of things are handled, that these questions will continue to grow and continue to expand until they knock up against the capacity of the federal government and the nonprofits to actually do something. Like, something has to change for sure. So
I'd like to jump in and add, excuse me, something that I've actually been, I don't want to say excited about, because I don't want to say anything's, excuse me, exciting about having a global pandemic. Well, it's exciting. It's not necessarily good, but I do see some silver linings in that. For example, feeding kids while they're out of school has been a continuous struggle for governments and nonprofits for the past 50 years. There are established programs to try to reach hungry kids during the summer to avoid sort of learning declines over the summer and just make sure that needs are met. But we've been working with programs that have had 50 years layers of regulations and approaches and procedures and processes and paperwork in place. And we've always known that it's not working as well as we want, but there's never been a major shift in it. Well, come along the pandemic, and folks have had to say, well, we have to have a major shift because we can't have the kids in school, but we can't have like big group lunches anymore. So we really need to think outside of the box now. So it was interesting to me that you saw some of the traditional barriers to changes to the program start to fall away given this new situation. For example, there was barriers to letting kids take food away from a feeding site, right, where meals were being distributed, and that changed. I think what the silver lining is that we can look at these changes to say, are there changes that we want to continue after the crisis has passed? Has this actually revealed more effective or efficient ways to meet needs even outside of a pandemic? So it's providing an opportunity to like say, okay, emergency, we're going to do it differently. And then maybe from that will be some big picture learnings about how we work the whole system. So that's the positive side of this that I think might come out of it. It's going to be hard to go back to old ways if we see the old ways were not really working.
And I would imagine that, as you've described how inequities in food access play out very differently in rural or in city settings, and have played out very differently in different regions of the state, I would imagine that different solutions are proving more useful on the ground in different places here. So that will be very interesting to see too.
Right. Well, and it depends on the capacities of the agencies that are role playing. Table is fantastic because they have really established relationships with schools, and they have great partnerships with other agencies. In terms of another local agency that created an innovative model of porch, which was really innovative in how to collect donations and increase the inflow, as well as partnerships with then getting it out with schools and business sponsorships of snack time at schools or after school snacks. There's so much innovation, but in part it depends on the capacity and the focus of the agencies in that place. And that's where we need to learn from each other in these different places to say what worked here, can it work some other place?
Yeah. Well, I know we're running close to the end of our time, but I would love to give each of you an opportunity to just reflect on what kind of systematic changes you are most hopeful about seeing come out of this, because clearly you both do see this as an opportunity for change.
Dr. Berner, do you want to? Okay. I think for us, and we have heard this over and over, one of the biggest things that this pandemic has shown a spotlight on is the real threat and real danger of having food security tied to a school, tied to a physical location that has to be open for kids to be able to get food. So I think we are really hopeful that this will change how children are able to get food, how organizations operate, whether that is, we will probably continue to work. We will definitely, actually not probably, we will definitely continue to work with the schools once they go back to work with social workers to take the food there, but definitely opens horizon questions to us about children who maybe don't go to school. Maybe they're homeschooled, maybe they're have other needs, but also working with organizations like porch and IFC to really look at the big picture and say, okay, we know that a physical location being tied to the solution of hunger doesn't work. What did work for this amount of time, and how can we make it work long term? Because it has definitely been a all hands on deck effort to make sure to kind of piece together for families the food that they need. And it's been an amazing effort by both nonprofit, state responses. Orange County Emergency Response Service has been just wonderful in keeping people connected and getting resources distributed. So definitely looking at those networks and how can they continue and how can they push for change beyond just a crisis. So
I'd like to echo, sort of coming out of this will be the two things. One is revealing the capacity constraints of the nonprofit sector as a whole in terms of where, for example, not just in working with a physical location, but in working with a volunteer base that is primarily older. Mm-hmm. So that's a huge boon in one way, but in this case, it's turned out to provide an additional constraint on the ability of folks to respond. So hopefully, it's revealing where we have current weaknesses overall in the social safety net, both in government programs and in nonprofit programs. And I'm going to do something that's very funny for, this is the reality of doing this live from home. Is the dog needed to go out, and I needed to let the dog out before he started barking. The other thing that I think that is really important coming out of this in a positive way are the collaborations, the networks and the cooperation where people are making contacts, they're developing relationships that they may not have had before. For example, I was on a phone call with somebody from who owned a series of restaurants, and they talked about they had a whole bunch of inventory that they couldn't cook and serve, right? And so how could they best use up that inventory and not dump it, right? And then, so we had a conversation about, well, you have the kitchen, you have the staff, but you can't serve. So, but hey, Meals on Wheels, they actually take prepared dishes to homes. I mean, even Meals on Wheels is facing significant constraints. But the point is that it was getting a restaurant to think about a partnership with a local nonprofit in terms of skills, resources, staff, in a win-win way that helped everybody out. And I think that that's going to be the key to the future, is a stronger network that includes business, that includes private sector, nonprofit sector, and the government sector, and not have it be siloed.
And that can be deeply resilient in a moment like this. What you're describing, it sounds like almost a jigsaw puzzle where you're trying to fit together different limitations and different strengths.
Yes, because I hate to say it, but hurricane season is not that far away either. And these networks are going to have to work this year, next year, 5 years from now.
Well, the conversation for now needs to pause, but I certainly hope that all of us will carry it forward. One final important question that was raised in the Q&A, for those people who do not have access to the internet, do either of you have suggestions about how best to find out about where to get food?
So a couple of news stations have run some articles that are in print. Okay. That is something definitely, though, that the emergency responders and other organizations are struggling with, because right now, no one has the capacity to go into neighborhoods and knock on doors and say, do you know what's available to you? I know that Porch is sending out gift cards, and like in their gift cards, they're putting all the resources, handouts of the resources that they know are available, whether it be Meals on Wheels, the Central Food Bank, us, things like that. We're doing very similar things. Weekly, we're putting in the bags, handouts, what has become available, what could you possibly connect with beyond us. And I do think that I'll have to, I might have to email you later. It's either the health department or it might be the health department. If you call, they do have a list of resources that they can connect you with. So they'll ask you how they should direct your call. They have like a COVID-19 hotline, they have a nurses hotline, and then they also have emergency services hotline. So I think that those are the main things. And one of the things we've learned from this crisis, and that we continue to learn, is you need to watch out for your neighbors. Like, you don't know, maybe someone who lives beside you that has seemed fine all along has lost their job, and as Dr. Berner pointed out, suddenly they're not making it meet anymore. So just being mindful of the people around you and how you can connect them if you are blessed enough to have the resources that you have with internet and things like that. So
this has raised the issue of the inequality in internet access and technology, the technology gap. Again, revealing some of the weaknesses in our systems is going to be huge. And this is one of the biggest. The schools which are trying to do online education, they have hit this. This is totally hitting them right now. So we've got to figure out a way to deal with it.
Well, thank you both so much for speaking with us today and for the work that you are doing on this topic. Before we wrap up for today, I do want to put in a brief plug for other upcoming events through Carolina Public Humanities. Every Thursday from 6 to 7, Max Orr is hosting a virtual humanities happy hour on a different theme where scholars come for a conversation. Tomorrow, he'll be talking about reading during the quarantine. And on May 12th, Lloyd Kramer will be hosting the first in a series of virtual reading groups. And this one will be focused on The Plague by Camus. So all sorts of different angles that we can use the humanities here. So to stay updated on events that we're putting on, just visit humanities.unc.edu. So one final thank you to our speakers. We'll be posting this video online along with a slide with some resources, and I hope you all check it out.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.